All right, so we are now recording. I do want to open the floor up to ask if anybody has any questions about assignments, group work, the upcoming midterm next week. Everybody feeling good about that?
You gonna go over the lie detection assignment?
You mean in class?
Yeah.
What do you mean go over it? Like what you're expected to do with it?
Yeah, or like, can I just like stay like after class like I did last time and ask you a question about it?
Well, what's your question? Let me ask that. Maybe
Um,
maybe other students would benefit from hearing it.
I don't know, cause like sometimes like when I read the directions, I'm better like someone telling me it than like me reading it.
Okay. All right. So let me bring it up on my screen here so I am not misleading you in any way and I'm not confusing you any more than. All right. So so this is under week 6 lie detection. Okay. So what you're going to be doing is just reading over that the narrative there, that not vignette. I guess it's more of a research that's been conducted on what polygraphs are. Now, the reason I brought this up for memory is because as we talk next Friday, or not next Friday, this upcoming Friday, as to what lies are and how our mind is influenced by external forces. And I'm going to talk about that, especially when we get into information processing theories. But we had made a lot of assumptions in the past that our mind is like a videotape or a hard drive, right? And that's absolutely not the case. We don't have limitations like you would a hard drive. Like some of your hard drives might be 1 terabyte, or if you're like me and on a budget, maybe you can only afford 250 gig or something like that, right? So those are limitations that we have on our hard drive. Our brains don't have those limitations. So we store things in forms of memories. And when we talk about encoding, this will make a little bit more sense. But we store things in memories, which are based on emotions and symbols. Okay. So it's not like a ones and zeros or wavelengths that get recorded. They're very much, I guess we don't know exactly what the encoding process is what I'm saying, but it's not like anything that we know, especially with the computers. So with that, lie detection is a very controversial topic because, you know, who determines what's a lie and what's the truth? It's a question for you. What's the difference between a lie and truth? Who determines if it's a fabrication or if it's actual truth?
Our parents.
What's that?
Our parents.
Our parents. Okay, so we determine what's right and wrong from our upbringing, which is usually from our parents, right? But when we get into mental health disorders, especially schizophrenia or borderline or any kind of personality disorders, we're going to discover that people that believe deviations from reality actually think that they're true, don't they? And anybody that's suffered or known somebody that suffered from schizophrenia, they have an altered perception of reality. So they believe what is happening to them, regardless of how far-fetched it is, whether there's aliens beaming lights into their brain or extracting information from their brain or the FBI watching them, even though that is not the truth for many of us, that's the truth for them. So that's one of the errors in polygraphs is if a person can believe it or if they can trick themselves into believe it, you know, what does that say about the validity of lie detectors? Okay. Just out of curiosity, has anybody ever had a polygraph before?
No.
Nobody here? Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a polygraph. So I worked, I was in the Air Force and I had clearances. And in order to keep those clearances, you had to be able to pass polygraphs and lie detectors. So I've had several done with me. And I could say if you go in there rattled in any way, it's going to affect the outcome of your test. So yeah, there are little things in there. But very much, I can see if somebody had altered perceptions of reality and they believed what they said, then they would easily pass those polygraphs. Okay. So anyway, yeah, you're going to read through that, and it gives you some examples of how these polygraphs work, and what some of the processes they follow in order to go through them. So read that and kind of decide for yourself what you believe, if these are a valid test, or if they aren't, what would make them more valid. Okay. And just go ahead and answer the questions below. There are 3 questions. Essay format, please. So you should at least get 1 to 2 pages of text on here. Again, if you want to put a title page, great, but I would at least need a reference page. So you can reference those articles, that article that I provided for you, or whatever, however you want to cite that, or cite your book if your book makes any kind of mention of how memories work. Okay. Any questions? Did that answer your question, Orlando?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. All right, any other questions?
I do have a question about the project. So, you're saying that we have to do a thesis statement this week, correct? Do we have to put in quotations like into the thesis statement, because you're saying that we have to have at least 8 sources, or like, because that's what me and my group did. Like, we've been working on it and we put in like quotes in there. So I don't know if we were supposed to do that or not.
So here are the things about quotes in APA, and again, I've not expected anybody to be an expert in APA format, especially at this level. Many of you are just being introduced to APA, so I don't expect you to know everything about that. But a general rule of thumb with APA format is you do not use quotes. You can reframe. So, for example, if I were to look at them, in fact, I have the article up right now on lie detection and polygraphs. So they, in quotes, this is what they would say: a different lie detection technique is less commonly used, but more promising, end quote. Okay. So that's how they quoted it. What I would need to do with APA isn't like a literary review or a literary, project, like a literary paper, MLA, where you're extracting information from novels and from publications, and then stating your case in that paper. You're still doing that, but in order, we don't want to take direct quotes from these authors. We want to take ideas from these authors and put them in there. So in other words, like what I just read you, a different lie detection technique is less commonly used, but more promising. What I could say is, according to, I don't have the author listed here, but according to so-and-so 2015, there are more promising techniques for detecting lies. My words, I rearrange them so that way I don't have to worry about quotes. And when you're doing your papers, you're going to do a very similar thing. You're going to take ideas out, and you can take an entire paragraph and sum them up in 1 sentence. Which is going to be a lot easier for you instead of taking entire quotes out. So for this week with the project, all I'm expecting you to do is come up with your own hypothesis or your own thesis statement, whichever you're doing. If you're doing an experiment, you're going to have a hypothesis. If you're doing literary review, you're either going to have a hypothesis or a thesis, whichever. And that's going to be your group's own words. Okay. And then you're going to go through the outline, and all I'm looking for in this outline is just bullet points. It doesn't have to be entire paragraphs. If you want to use paragraphs, that's fine. But all I'm looking for is that you've got some kind of organization developing based on what you have. And the reason why I'm asking for at least 8 sources is because that's about the minimum you're going to need for this project. You might need more, and if you have more, that's great. I wouldn't go any less than 8. So go out there and see what you can find to use these as resources for your final project. Okay.
So we don't need any quotes in our thesis statement at
Nope.
all.
Nope. No quotes. You should avoid quotes in an APA paper at all costs.
Okay, and also, you said it has to be 3 to 5 pages. Then, like, how would it fill up 3 to 5 pages? Because usually a thesis statement is a couple of sentences.
Well, you're also going to be doing the outline. So the outline is going to fill in, and it's all double spaced, keep in mind. So don't do extra work if you don't have to. Don't do the single space, because that's going to be that's going to be a lot to try and get 3 pages. You're going to find, once you get your thesis or hypothesis, and try and fill out your introduction a little bit, why this is important, because that's what you want. in your outline. Speak to me as to why this is important, and then you're going to go line by line through what you're hoping to find. If you don't get 3 pages, that's not a big deal. I'm finding most projects, most students turn in about 3 to 5 pages anyway. It's very easy to hit, especially with double space. But if you don't get 3 pages, don't stress out about it. As long as I see that you're thorough and that you're organized. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? All right. Any questions on the midterm next week? How are you all feeling? Feeling like that's making sense?
What chapters are is the midterm going to be on? Up until this class or till a certain point?
Chapters 1 through 6.
Okay.
So up through this week. So you'll be able to take your quiz this week, and that whatever is on that quiz this week is going to be on the midterm next week. Okay.
Okay. Wait, it's an accumulation of all the quizzes that we took so far. Like it's something from each of them.
Yep. So what I did is I took all of the items that were eligible for the quizzes and put them into the midterm. So they are all eligible for that. Now on Friday, midnight, Friday morning or Thursday night, however you want to call it, you'll have access to all of those quizzes. There'll be practice quizzes. So instead of what you're doing now, and you're welcome to use your quizzes now, by the way, if you want to use your past quizzes and take those to practice. Now, the limitation to that is you're only going to have 10 randomized ones from a list of 20 or 30 items. So you may not get all of them until you've taken them several times, okay? So what I am releasing as of Friday morning, Thursday night, Friday morning, are practice quizzes, which are gonna have all of the items that are on those quizzes, and you can take them. Now, I'm not gonna give you the answer. It'll show up which ones you got incorrect, but it's not gonna give you the answer, so don't ask. You'll still have to look them up in some fashion, either through your textbook or whatever. So that will give you a lot of practice to that. I think Brianna is looking at doing some kind of review next week. More to come on that. Aiming for Wednesday of next week. And again, it's just going to be more, I'm not going to be lecturing anything next week. It's just going to be focusing on your midterm. So this will be just kind of a fun thing if we can do it, if we can. We're trying to work out the bugs because doing it online, we used to do Jeopardy with the live classes, have everybody break up into groups and do that. We're still trying to figure out how we can do that with a Zoom class. So more to come on that. If we're able to do it, great, but don't count on that to be your study guide. Use those practice quizzes because that's going to be what's going to prove successful for you. Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay, great. So let me share my screen with you. One more note before I forget. For next week, again, no lectures. I know we have the switch day on Tuesday, which means we would normally have classes during a regular scheduled time. So we would normally be meeting Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday of next week. However, again, I don't have any lessons lined up for next week, so I'm only doing office hours. So if there's any reason that you want to meet up, and like I said, Wednesday we'll decide if Wednesday will be our review day if we can come up with something. But other than that, yeah, no lectures will be next week. All right. So just wanted to make sure we were clear on that. All right. So let me share my screen with you. All right. So before I do that, so I want to start out by asking what is memory? What is your earliest memory? Who has like an early memory that they would like to share with us? Like their first memory ever?
You said like our earliest memory, correct?
Yeah, your earliest memory ever. What's the first thing you remember?
I remember when I was 2, my mom was in the kitchen baking a cake and I was in the living room and she walked out of the kitchen for a couple of minutes, and I ran into the kitchen. It was trying to crack the eggs into the bowl.
Okay. And you were 2? You remember that? How do you know you were 2 when that happened?
I have pictures to prove it as well.
Okay. All right. Well, that's neat. Wow, that's really early on. How about other memories?
My first cuss word.
You remember your first cuss word? Is that your first memory of anything?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. I'm not going to ask you what the word is, but
Yeah.
all right. How old were you?
Like 3.
3. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Anybody else have a really early memory that they?
I was probably like, I think I was like 3. I was at my grandparents' old house, and me and my grandfather were sitting at the dining room table playing with Play-Doh, and he made a cheeseburger and told me that it was okay if I ate it. So I took a bite out of it because like I really didn't know. And then my grandmother was at the like sink, and she just started yelling at him.
Okay. All right. So there are probably a couple things going on there. But what I'm hearing from, and thank you, Makai, Megan, and Janaya, did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Okay, good. So what I heard from all of you is that right around 2-3 years old is where your first memories were. And that's actually, Janaya, that's really early. So the fact that, do you happen to know, were you an early talker?
Yeah, I was.
Okay, all right. That would explain a lot. And the reason why I ask that is because we start at a young age, we form memories. If you remember last week, we talked about learning and how learning occurs, and it usually results in one of 2 things: either something that we're reinforced, that we gain, or something that we try to avoid. And memory has an instrumental role in how learning occurs. As we, and at a young age, up until about 24 months, we don't have really a lot of memories per se, because we are so busy trying to absorb the world around us and do different things and learn, because that's our goal, is to learn. As we get in, I think when we come back from our midterm exam, we're going to talk about languages and how languages form some of those memories, because now we're able to interact with our environment, which is really important for us, and it's really important for our learning process. So that's why I asked if you were an early talker, because you probably started mastering language a little bit earlier, and therefore able to interact with your environment and therefore create memories. So that's right around the age 2, 3, 4 years old is when we have our first memories. Unless something happens, sometimes trauma happens that people forget, try to forget, purposely forget, so it doesn't re-traumatize them. But for the most part, we usually see memories form at 2, 3, 4 years old. All right. So, and I'll share with you my first memory. It actually wasn't a memory; it was a dream. I think my parents told me I was about 3 years old too. But I don't know if any of you have seen these. So they're piggy banks, and on one side it's a clown on one side, and it's a clown on the other side. Side A has a smiley face; he's cheerful and looks happy. On the other side, he's got a frowny face with crosses on his eyes. And for some reason, I was terrified of side B, and I don't know why. But my parents said every time that they had to flip this thing around, because every time I saw it, I started crying and panicking. So I don't know where I learned that this was a bad face. It just was not an appealing face to me. So anyway, I had a dream about that I was running, and this sad faced clown was chasing me. So anyway, and again, I was about 2 or 3 years old when that happened, because it broke. I think I broke it when I was 3. So anyway, so what are memories? What are your definition of memories? I know your book has an answer. What are some of your definitions? What does a memory for you mean?
Things that happened in our lifetime that had a significant effect on us.
Okay. So things. Oops. Memories. So things that impact us, like experiences, we'll say experiences that impact us. Now, what do you mean by impact, or had an impact on you?
Like if you, like the one time that your mom told you not to touch the stove and you
Ah,
burned your hand, so like you remember like, oh, or like yeah, you remember like I burned my hand when I was younger after touching a stove, or like you have a scar and then you remember where the scar came from.
okay, okay, all right. So what you're saying, so kind of like learning. So things that are unpleasant for us, we learn not to do, right? But
Yeah.
those are based out of our memories, right? Because we have that memory formed within our head saying this was a bad experience, and out of that we have a repeated behavior, which we can observe as learning, right? So what about what are some other examples or definitions, personal definitions you have about memories? Anybody care to share a definition? What they think is a definition? Crickets. Okay. I mean, I'm happy to talk all day. So I'm going to give you the book definition. An active system that senses, organizes, alters, stores, and retrieves information. Okay. So I'm going to start this definition off with a process. I know that wasn't in your book definition, but when we think of a process, we think of something that goes around and around, right? And sometimes it improves, sometimes, but it's very circular. So they said a process that senses, um, organizes, alters, stores, and recalls. Okay. So it's very important to understand that all 5 of these criteria have to be met in order for us to say something is a memory. We have to be able to input something and be able to manipulate it in some way, and then store it either in our short term or long term, and then recall it. Okay, so those 5 criteria have to be met. We do that through and I'm going to kind of break this down a little further, through a process that we call encoding, storing, and recall. Yeah. Okay. So encoding, just like I said. So let me run a scenario by you here. How many of you can tell me what dialectical behavioral training is? We're all in psychology, right? So what's dialectical behavior training? Behavioral therapy, DBT. Can anybody tell me? Well, why not? We're in psychology class. Why can't anybody tell me what DBT is?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Dialectical behavioral therapy.
We haven't learned it yet.
We haven't learned it yet, right? I haven't given it to you, so it hasn't entered your senses. Even if I did mention it, just even mention it in passing might not be enough for you to organize, alter, and store it, which in return says by nature you will not be able to recall it because I never gave it to you. So sensing and encoding is a very, very important part of memory. And many of you that are studying for the midterm next week, you probably know this, right? You got to be able to absorb it. You got to be able to take it in before you can store it and then ultimately recall it. So encoding is the input according to our brain's code. So just like your hard drive, and you're going to hear me refer to computers a lot, especially when we get to memory processing, I'll explain this. Our hard drive uses a series of ones and zeros to store information based on how they're sequenced and how they're arranged. It gives us images, it gives us sound, it gives us types and pictures, right? Very similar with our brain. we have to be able to have some kind of language that our brain is able to take information in, decide what we're going to focus on, and then use that information, then store it. So we have our own kind of code, and many of you probably know that, right? Some of you are maybe more visual learners, maybe you're more auditory learners, right? Maybe you're more hands-on. Whatever your way is, you have a specific code that helps you to encode and store information, right? Storing is just hold on to information. And I'll explain how we do that. Hold on to information. And recall is pulling information, pull info for use. And that could be through some kind of learning system or whatever that may look like. So I mentioned earlier that this is a process. And what we see with memory, it's not very, I mean, it is linear in some way with some of these theories. But as we see here, we encode information, we store that information, and then at some point, it would make sense that we need to recall that information, right? Now, we usually recall that information when our environment or interactions with others requires us to. So what we're doing is we're regurgitating that information to somehow learn something new or reinforce what we already learned. So we kind of go through this encoding process all over again. And then once we take the information that we learned, we build onto that, and now we stored old information with new information, and then we'll eventually have to recall that. So that's what I mean by this is a very cyclical cyclical process, okay? Now your book covered several theories on how we process, what theories we have for processing memories. I'm just going to mention quickly two of them, which was parallel distribution processing, or PDP, okay? And also, we made mention of levels of processing. Or LOP, okay? And we also talked about in your book, information processing model. Now, the reason why, and again, we're gonna revert back to what I initially said in this class is psychology is a soft science. We don't have the scientific methods to putting little electrodes in our brain and having them reproduce images that we see, right? We see areas of the brain light up based on what stimuli are going into us, but for the most part, we don't really have a firm grasp on the science behind how memories work. We just know that it happens. We know what to observe, so we can feel good about our definition of memory. But for the most part, we don't have a 100% true and trite model of how memory works. So what we did is we just created theories based on the observations that we've seen. So parallel distribution processing model, and again, this is going to be really quick, so try and bear with me, assumes that we are using our 5 senses to take information in, okay? What are our 5 senses? Anybody care to recite them for me?
See, hear, smell, taste, and then feel.
Right. All 5 senses there. Sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. So let's say this is our input mode, and then this is our output mode. Now our output mode is usually what we are trying to get out of information, right? So for example, if we're taking a test next week, what you're gonna, I let you know what the output expectation is, and based on that output, you're going to take in that information in your input, right? So we also have a middle unit according to this PDP model. So let's use an example here. I know this doesn't look a lot like anything I don't even know if this is in your book. But let's take an example. Let's say our output is we want to identify a woman's face. So we're going to ask the question, is it a face? And is it a woman? Okay. So we get our vision, hearing, touch, smell, and taste, we'll say. All right, so we get a vision. We see an image, right? Image goes in, and based on that image, we're going to say, is it a face? Is it familiar? Is it inanimate? So according to this model, that vision comes in and it goes through this middle unit to identify what we know about it. And based on our previous experiences, this middle unit is going to dictate the outcome. So is it a face? Is it familiar? Is it a woman's face? Is it inanimate? Probably not. So this route doesn't get used, okay? And the more senses that we have with hearing, maybe we hear her voice. We can say, that's familiar, right? We can also say that it's probably not inanimate, right? So that one cancels out. So taste, we're probably not going to taste a person's face, you know, not legally anyway. So what we could say here, maybe it's a familiar smell. Maybe it's grandma, right? Grandma, they smell like you know, cookies sometimes, right? So maybe it's familiarity, and again, we can confirm that it is a face and it is a woman. And again, maybe grandma has cookies, so we just know, yeah, even without seeing her. So you see how this works. All this information goes to this middle tier, and it's constantly streaming information to our output. Okay, so that's according to the PDP model. All right, so again, I'm not going to go too much in depth in this. If you want to learn this on your own, you're more than welcome to. But we're going to be more interested in the information processing model, which I'll get to in a minute. Your levels of processing, according to the book, go from shallow. Oops, wait, start on this side. Shallow to deep. So deep understanding, deep memory processing occurs again based on the output. So your expectancy is to, but I'm going to use the word boy. So based on the output, I'm going to ask you a question. Is there a capital letter in this word? Can anybody answer that?
Can you repeat that, please?
Is there a capital letter in this word?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, capital letter, right? Easy, right? Yes or no? Yes or no? Now, if you think back to, again, what would your level of processing mean? Actually, before I get to that, let me finish my thought here. So as we get a little bit deeper here in our understanding, our need to understand, I'm again going to ask you the output for this. Does this word rhyme with toy?
Yes.
Yes, right? And so you need to know a little bit more about it. Right now, when we were in the shallow part of this, all we needed to understand is break those letters up. We didn't even need to know what that word was. But now we're getting a little deeper with it because now we have sounds involved in it. Now let's go a little deeper yet. I met a blank on the corner of the street. Can you use that word to fill in that blank?
Yeah.
Right, you can. It fits in there wonderfully. It makes sense. But we need to know an even deeper meaning to that. So let's apply this to how you are with your classes and your exams. So how much time are you going to commit to a multiple choice exam like the one we have next week? Are you going to commit as much time to that as you would say I had you do all essays or fill in the blanks? Which one are you going to spend more time with? Probably the essays, right? Essays and fill in the blanks. Why?
It takes more thinking and more like construction.
Yeah, you're going to need to be a little bit more critical with your thinking. You're going to need a deeper understanding of what these theories mean, as opposed to what? Just being able to pick it out of a lineup, right? So that's really the theory behind levels of processing, is based on, again, what we're asked to do is going to determine how much effort we're going to put into memorization. Are we going to be able to pick it out from a lineup, or do we really need to spend a couple hours in understanding what this idea is that we're being asked to reproduce or being asked to recall, right? So our output in both of these models, our output depends on the level of energy and attention that we focus on the input. All right, are you with me so far? I know I kind of breezed through those pretty quickly. It's kind of at breakneck speed, and I apologize for that. But I want to get on to one of the models that is really centrally focused on psychology as we know that. Now, interestingly enough, the information processing model, we compare a lot. How many of you know about computers? I think I asked this before. How many of you know about computers? How do computers work? What would we consider an input for our computer? What's an input? So we have information. How do we input stuff into our computers?
We download it or transport it via USB.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit here. Say you're sitting at a computer and you want to know something, or you want to work with something, like maybe you're typing a paper or something. Just sitting there looking at your computer and saying, hey, I want to download something, does that work? Are you able to just say, hey, computer, download something? Maybe if you have Siri, right? Or even Alexa, for that matter. But how do you input that information into your computer? Anybody?
Your mouse or keyboard?
Keyboard, right. Input devices, exactly. Keyboard, mouse, scanners, you name it. Scanners, cameras, microphones, the list could go on. Mics, okay? So that's our input. So based on what we need from our input, maybe we aren't doing a Zoom session today. So we don't need our microphones and cameras. Well, I'm sorry, if we are doing a Zoom session, we do need our microphones and cameras. Sorry. We may not need a scanner, for example. So we're kind of selecting how that information is being put into our memory, right? Which is, does anybody know what our short-term memory is for our computers? Does anybody familiar with them? What's our short-term memory with our computers?
RAM.
RAM, random access memory, right? So what your RAM is everything that you're doing on your computer. Like if you're on your laptops or computers or whatever it is right now, you're looking at something you're working with, right? If it's on your screen, chances are you're working with it. So that is run through your RAM because you're constantly typing something here, maybe moving off. You still have that screen open so you can move on to do something a little bit different, right? So this is what we would consider your short-term memory on your computer. So when you don't need that information, say you close down that file, where do you put that information then? Say you don't need that information, you have to save it and put it somewhere. Where does that go?
Like in a flash drive, or maybe like some sort of like
Right.
software.
Right. We'll say drive. So either flash drive or hard drive or something, right? Somewhere where you can put it and put it in a shelf and it could sit there for days or months or even years. And as long as you're not needing that, you're not going to be using it, right? But when you do need that, you bring that right back into the RAM, bring it up on your screen, and you're using it again, okay? So according to the information processing model, which is really interesting, I find what's most interesting about this is we develop computers in response to how we view our own existence, how we view our own memory processing working. And now we're using that model to explain how our memory works, which I think is just kind of a revolving door there. So within our systems, our brain systems, we have our sensory input. And we talked about that. Your sensory input is all the information coming in from your environment. So it could be songs coming in that you're listening to, right? Sights, sounds, whatever, all your senses are coming in to your sensory input. And based on what you need or what's important to you, your sensory input is using selective attention to decide what's important. Like many of you, I use this example when people come into my my classroom. I'll ask them as a demonstration for this, how many of you, without looking, can count how many lights are on the ceiling, or how many tiles are on the walls without looking at them? Now, they probably, I would say, with there was one student that actually knew, and I think somebody might have alerted him. But for the most part, why don't we remember those things? Because they're not important. Our selective attention is saying it's not relevant to what we're doing, so we're not going to pay attention to that. And that happens in your short-term or your working memory, okay? Which I'm gonna abbreviate STM, or working memory, all right? So what function is the short-term memory? Similar to what your RAM is in your computer. It's what we're doing at that time. So for example, you want to study for our midterm next week. You're going to take your books. You're going to use your practice exams, and you're going to rehearse. That's an important term here, is rehearsal. The operative word here is hear, by the way. You're rehearing it. You're hearing it in your brains, in your minds, okay? And you're going to work over that information until you get the output that you need, okay? So the output to, again, interact with your environment, all right? When you don't need that information, let me mark this as output. When you don't need that information, we store that in what's called our long-term memory, or LTM, all right, for future use. All right, we've already rehearsed it, and the more we rehearse it, the stronger that memory is going to be, because we're taking in more sights and senses and touches and smells and just the overall experience. Because we keep rehearsing it, we're looking for more information, and the more information we get, the stronger that memory is going to be in our long-term memory. And just like your hard drive, if we need at a future date that information, we're going to regurgitate that out of our LTM into our short-term memory, and then use that information with our working memory to rehearse it until we get the output that we need. Okay. Am I with you so far? All right. So I'm actually going to stop here for now because I'm going to pick up where we left off on Friday, and we're going to talk about what some things, where some of these processes go wrong and what can happen. What does that look like? Now, we used an example today. Why don't you know DBT? The reason is because I haven't given you that information. But what if I gave you that information? What if you went through this process of rehearsal and were reusing that information and put it in your long-term memory, but for some reason couldn't get it out? We're going to explore how that looks on our next lesson, okay? Any questions so far? Any comments? Are y'all with me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, did it make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, yeah, if barring any questions, I'm going to stop here today. I'll stick around for just a few minutes if anybody has any questions for me one-on-one. All right. Have a good day, everybody. I'll see you Friday.
Have a good day.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
I have a question.